We're going in depth on this Monday on a topic that's probably on a lot of people's minds during flu season, and that is paid sick time. It is a luxury that some employers still don't provide, and the state legislature has blocked all attempts by local governments to enforce paid sick leave policies. Bay News 9's Holly Gregory sat down with an employment attorney to learn more about why time off benefits both companies and workers.
And joining me now to talk more about the possibility of mandatory sick pay is an employment attorney, Heather Brock. Thanks for joining us, Heather.
Thanks so much for having me.
So the state basically left it up in the air for a year. They held off on saying whether local governments could do anything with this issue or not until a task force could look at it. What's going on with that task force? What are they trying to find out exactly?
Well, they're looking at what the effects would be statewide if we had this kind of legislation. And I think they were alarmed by the possibility that there might be different localities all enacting a patchwork of different laws which provided for differing levels of protection for the employee and what the cost might be to the employers.
Now, the argument for it is sort of the humane side of, people are going to work sick because they can't afford to take the time off that they don't get paid for, but yet can employers really afford to pay that time off if they're forced to? I mean, that's got to be a big issue, and I know you represent employers. What kind of feedback do you get?
Well, I think a lot of employers, especially the larger ones, have made paid sick leave part of their policies and procedures already, so that protection that they're talking about legislating is there. Some smaller employees, especially those who run on a really small profit margin, really can't afford to pay people to be out of work. And then you also have the risk that the employee, knowing now they have 5 paid sick days a year, takes them whether they're sick or not.
And a little bit of what I've read from the feedback of the task force, I think there's some public health workers that are involved in it, and they're saying this is a public health issue, especially when it comes to food service workers. They're going in sick and they're spreading germs and such, but you're not forced to go in and work sick. You can still take that day off, you just don't get paid. And I'm not being flippant about that. I know that's a hardship, but yet again, just because you get paid time off doesn't necessarily mean you're going to take advantage of it.
That's right. That's right. I think what happens is when you've got somebody who's sick, most employers, and certainly all of my clients, don't fire someone the first day they call in sick. They understand that things happen, and I think there's an understanding that if it's a single parent who has a child who gets sick, they might be absent as well. But you have to balance that against the need to operate the business and to keep the business running and the employer being able to pay them.
Now, the other issue here is just an economic impact statewide. If you have all sorts of different local governments setting different rules for mandatory paid sick time, that gets a little confusing if you're an employer who may be bringing in business to say, you know what, this is just too all over the map for us here, and maybe they won't set up shop in Florida because of that. Or is that not so much a concern?
I think that is a concern. I mean, we're working really hard in Florida to show the rest of the nation that we're not just your grandmother's retirement state, and that we are all about economic development. So as we try to bring companies in, the fewer regulations and government mandates we have that might be negative impacting to a business, the better.
And this task force has been set up by the governor, Rick Scott, who is not a big regulation on business guy, to say the least. So he sets up this task force. I guess they're supposed to be nonpartisan, but are you confident that they are, or they're not?
Well, I don't know that I can opine on that really, but one would think that the task force is going to be sympathetic to what Governor Scott's view seems to be, is let's leave this to the marketplace rather than to the legislature.
And we talked about the possibility of all the different local municipalities maybe getting the green light to do this, maybe not. That's what they're going to have to figure out. But could it possibly go up to a state level, and maybe that would sort of simplify the playing field? You get a state law that mandates one way or the other that would supersede any local governments.
You could, and in fact that's exactly what Connecticut has done. And Connecticut is the first state to have such a law that provides for paid sick leave to all of its employees in the private sector. And that followed on a number of municipalities, most of whom were kind of liberally minded doing so. So it remains to be seen exactly how things will develop.
That's still relatively new there, so we really haven't seen how that's all going to play out, I guess.
Correct,
yeah.
Correct. And what the cost is.
Right. Well, for those of us who have that paid sick leave, just be thankful for it. I know it is a great thing to have, and a lot of people don't. And you don't want to call in, you don't want to have to take that day without paid leave, but yet there are these other impacts that we're discussing. So we'll see how this task force recommends and what they do from there. But Heather, we appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you so much.
Now, the legislature has appointed a task force to gather statistics on paid sick policies and then report back to them next year. Lawmakers say they'll use that information to consider drafting some kind of statewide policy.